Conservatism is having an identity crisis, and when a movement's flagship publication features a this we believe statement on its cover, as National Review recently did, you know there's a problem, but the problem itself is not new. Last summer, the American Conservative published a special edition devoted to the question, "What is American conservatism?" The issue drew on essays by dozens of self-identified conservatives, each attempting to define their movement. Reading through them, one might get the impression that conservatism is not one point of view, but a whole slew of them. Yet, in truth, there is only one important intellectual schism on the right that's worthy of attention, that between those who embrace the legacy of the European Enlightenment and those who reject it. The Enlightenment, or the Age of Reason, was the revolution against the institutions of statism and superstition that freed the human minds and human relationships in the 16th and 17th centuries. As Steven Pinker has aptly noted, the free minds and free markets that resulted from this revolution are the reason for the relative prosperity and security that we enjoy today. I can only imagine how liberating and exciting it must have been to have lived through that time when David Hume, Adam Smith, Thomas Jefferson, and America's founding fathers were overthrowing an old intellectual and political order and creating new ones. I'd like to think that it must have felt similar to the 1980s of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, when ideas such as the flat tax, school vouchers, private Social Security accounts, deregulation, and privatization were sweeping through the globe, and promoted with palpable energy and enthusiasm by a raft of newly created conservative, what they call think tanks. A decade later, as the 20th century came to a close, communism and big government were in retreat and free market reforms remained ascendant everywhere. But alas, the 21st century has seen considerable backsliding, which has fueled the rise of those on the other side of the conservative, what they call schism, the folks who reject the legacy of the Enlightenment. The school of thought is aptly represented in What is Conservatism, the classic essay collection edited by Frank Meyer and published a little over 55 years ago. Basically, it was recently people had recently reread the book, seeking to find anything in it that might engage a politically agnostic college student, making him eager to be part of the conservative movement. Sadly, it came up empty. The kind of conservatism pushed by What is Conservatism doesn't just fail to win converts. It also isn't prepared to solve real world problems and issues. But at the same time that Meyer's book was published, Milton Friedman published a book called Capitalism and Freedom. The two books are as different as night and day. Whereas the essays Meyer edited are backward looking, Friedman's book is forward looking, and whereas the former lamented change, the latter called for the kind of change that liberates people and makes their lives better. Friedman was well aware that his approach to public policy was very different from that of conventional conservatives. He even avoided calling himself a conservative, preferring to identify with the tradition of classical liberalism, but his ideas came to dominate American conservatism anyway, at least until the development of the movement's present schism, and for those of us who still believe in them, there is much work to be done going forward. In every large city in the country, large numbers of low-income minority families are forced to live in some standard housing, and they basically are forced to send their children to failing schools. They benefit the least from almost every public service, and from transportation to health care to public safety, and they are also denied job opportunities by the medieval-style occupational licensing laws. These cities are almost always run by Democrats, usually liberal Democrats. A reformist conservative agenda would advocate school choice, the liberation of the housing and job markets and private alternatives to central city services. And likewise, too many American seniors are trapped in antiquated social insurance schemes that should be an embarrassment to a civilized society such as ours. They are misled on a daily basis by Social Security bureaucrats who encourage them to take early retirement, giving up benefits that are growing at a 3% rate, and no real rate of return every year. Then, when they do take a part-time job, they face the highest marginal tax rates in the nation, as high as 95% in some cases. But the seniors on Medicare are the only people in the country who cannot have a health savings account or direct 24/7 access to a primary care physician as an alternative to the emergency room. As people argue in the book New Way to Care, we desperately need to reform Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the disability system, and other forms of social insurance that were designed in a different century to meet the different needs. But these are only a few of the ways in which an activist conservative agenda could liberate the people and markets and reform institutions and make the world better for the most vulnerable among us. But for that to happen, the conservative movement will first have to decide whether it wants to embrace its Enlightenment roots or reject them again. But yep.